Good afternoon. My name is Harrison Shames, and I'm going to speak about psychological interventions today. So, the first thing I wanted to just speak about was psychological skills training, also known as PST. Psychological skills training and coaching refers to a systematic and consistent practice of mental or psychological skills for the purpose of enhancing performance, increasing enjoyment, or achieving greater sport and physical activity self-satisfaction. So, this is kind of the umbrella that the psychological interventions that we'll speak about in a bit kind of fall under. So, PST implementation. Although PST programs take many forms to match participants' individual needs, they generally follow a set structure with three distinct phases: education, acquisition, and practice. Mental training should continue throughout an athlete's sport participation. The learning of psychological skills should progress from practices and simulations to actual competitions. So, what are psychological interventions? In psychology, interventions are actions performed to bring about change in people. They modify behavior, emotional state, or feelings. Greenspan and Felts reviewed 23 published studies of the effectiveness of various psychological interventions, including stress inoculation, imagery, relaxation, reinforcement, and systematic desensitization in many competitive settings. They concluded that, in general, educationally based psychological interventions improve competitive performance in collegiate and adult athletes. The important aspect there is one, to have educationally based psychological interventions. People always speak about the importance of things we'll speak about later, such as imagery and self talk, but they don't utilize the resources available to go about it properly. And that kind of falls back into the education that we speak about, educating our athletes about psychological interventions, but doing it to the highest degree. Just like as if we were going to teach a football skill, we would want to do it to the highest degree. The same goes with a psychological intervention. So we'll kind of get back to those three when we cover the different interventions that we'll be speaking about today. So the effectiveness of psychological interventions. Weinberg and Komar examined 45 studies using psychological interventions in competitive sports settings. Positive performance effects were apparent in 38, which is about 85% of the studies, although the cause-effect relationships could be inferred in only 20 of them. A greater percentage of the more recent studies showed positive effects of psychological interventions. This is likely attributed to the more in-depth multimodal approach taken in recent years, which combines different types of psychological skills in a packaged approach. We're going to be speaking about the package approach today. While I was researching it, I liked how they would combine two of these interventions and make it into one. I think you get your best bang for your buck when you kind of do it this way. So when we're going through, when I was selecting the interventions, I wanted to select a package that I thought worked well and that I could research. So my package that I decided was relaxation and imagery and how they go together. And another intervention that I'm going to speak about is self-talk. So for the for the interventions I selected, I'm going to describe how I would implement each of these in my own setting, explain the intervention chosen, explain the positives of each, and also each has a limitation. So we'll speak about all of these. So the psychological intervention packages that we kind of spoke about, they're a combination of different interventions. So many other studies have focused on psychological intervention packages, approaches that use a variety of interventions along with imagery. And I find by utilizing the package as I spoke about, it just allows you to cover more and to be able to utilize different modalities in a tighter time. You know, as coaches, we always say we don't have enough time. We don't have enough time to get things done, whether it's practice or whatever it might be. And we need to approach these interventions with the same sense of urgency. And I think by combining them, we can get more done quicker. So before I kind of get into my package deal, I wanted to speak about self-talk. According to Weinberg and Gold, self-talk takes many forms, but it can be categorized simply as motivational, instructional, and negative. Motivational self-talk and instructional self-talk are typically assets that can enhance self-esteem, motivation, and intentional focus. These types of self-talk have been shown to enhance performance, although the type of self-talk needs to be matched to the type of task for maximum benefits. Negative self-talk, which is a limitation of self-talk, is critical and self-demeaning, and it tends to produce anxiety, which undermines concentration. When I look back at the PST implementation, you know, the first step is education. I think it's important that the athlete understands that even though there are great benefits to self-talk, there are limitations and negative aspects if an athlete does use negative self-talk. And if these things do arise in as we're educating the athlete, that they need to let the coach know, and our job is to guide them to use hopefully motivational or instructional self-talk. Tennis players who underwent a motivational self-talk intervention reported higher levels of self-efficacy and performance than did a control group. Think. Use your prepared self strategy. Focus your thoughts on controllable things in the process of performance. Thoughts and self-talk should be instructional and motivational rather than judgmental. Positive self-talk can provide specific performance cues as well as keep motivation and energy high. Although it is sometimes difficult to do, positive self-talk results in a more enjoyable and successful athletic experience, making it well worth using. Thinking that you achieve something realistic can actually help you achieve it. Self-talk is considered a primary self-regulatory tool that sports psychologists advocate to enhance confidence. I know that, for example, I believe that all parts of practice, there's no time to waste. So even during warm-ups, or where the whole group is together, or when at the end of practice, when you were speaking to the whole group, this is a great time to utilize self-talk and educate and teach the athletes about it. You know, I think sometimes coaches, we shy away and we get nervous about different psychological interventions because we say, oh, we don't have time to do it. When are we ever going to do it? Well, utilize it in your practice. Nobody said that it has to be a set time, aside to get something like this done. So for me personally, I know that is a time that I like to utilize, whether it's before practice or the end of practice, to kind of utilize some of these different interventions. The next psychological intervention I want to speak about is imagery, which combined with another intervention makes the packages. Imagery is also considered a primary self-regulatory tool that sports psychologists advocate to enhance confidence. Studies using imagery as part of a psychological intervention package have shown positive performance results with golfers, basketball players, triathletes, etc. It has also been revealed the positive relationship between imagery and performance. Evidence from scientific experiments in support of imagery is impressive and clearly demonstrates the value of imagery in learning and performance motor skills. These studies have been conducted across different levels of ability and in many sports, including basketball, football, volleyball, tennis, golf, etc. I know as an athlete myself in high school, my coach utilized imagery. And I remember a specific game where we just as a group kind of sat there and closed our eyes, and he kind of played out the game for us, match to match, set to set, play to play. And I know when I went into that game, I felt this sense of calm and kind of mentally prepared for what was going to happen. I would say, though, that a limitation to imagery is that sometimes athletes, they imagine the best positive result that can happen. And when something negative occurs during the game, sometimes how do they react? You know, we all imagine ourselves taking the last shot with 3 seconds left and it going in, but what if it doesn't? So sometimes I think that can be a limitation, but, you know, that's part of the education process for each of the athletes to explain, you know, this is what it does. Hopefully this is what the result is, but there's a possibility it might not be. So then we get into our package of relaxation and imagery. To help in this regard, Pavia distinguished between two functions of imagery, motivational and cognitive. He suggested that imagery plays both cognitive and motivational roles in mediating behavior, and that each is capable of being oriented toward either general or specific behavioral goals. I also take it that imagery, it induces all of the senses when you're imagining, you're feeling, you're smelling, you're almost you're all the senses of the game, the competition are brought out. On the motivational specific side, also known as MS, people can use imagery to visualize specific goals and goal-oriented behaviors, such as winning a contest or being congratulated. In fact, imagery can help an individual set specific goals and then adhere to the training. Different aspects of imagery, though, performing well to maintain confidence is example of MGM, using imagery to psych up and increase arousal. Create positive imagery, especially in competition. Although the focus of imagery research has been on generating positive images, sometimes imagery, just like self-talk, can be negative and have an adverse effect on performance. When directly asked, 35% of athletes, 25% of coaches, and 87% of sports psychologists could point to examples where imagery inhibited performance. Pat Summitt, the highly successful women's basketball coach who was retired from the University of Tennessee, unfortunately passed away not too long ago, used imagery for relaxation before important games when players tend to get too pumped and play out of control. So that's kind of how the relaxation plays back into it, utilizing the imagery to not increase arousal or psych up your players, but to relax them and have them feel confident yet under control before a game. So when I go back to the PST implementation, again, educate, right? Educating about self-talk. What are the positives? What are the negatives? What are things that are good to say? You know, we have an internal dialogue with ourselves every day. We have 60,000 thoughts a day. So the quality of the dialogue separates the good performer from the peak performer. And 5 ways we self-talk about performance. I think I can. I hope I can. I believe I can. I know I can. And lastly, I will make this happen. That's the point we want to get to. So educating our athletes. Once we acquire self-talk, okay, we need to practice it. Just like and same with the imagery, which I'll get to. I think sometimes when it comes to the psychological aspect of the athlete, you know, we talk about educating them and them acquiring it, but then we don't practice it. It's the same way with a skill, a sports-specific skill. If we teach blocking, we educate the athlete, and then they acquire it. Well, we need to practice it over and over and over and over until game time comes and they can put the skill onto the field or to the court, wherever the athlete performs, and do it to the highest of their capability. You know, imagery, same thing, educating the athletes. You know, how would we do this? I know for myself, I liked how we did it in high school, where it was just before a game, okay, and we kind of just sat there and closed our eyes and imagine how the game will play out. But another perfect time to do this would be during film. Sometimes they visually see it. Now have them, hey, close your eyes. The defender does this. How do we react? What do we need to do? So there's a multitude of times, whether it's throughout practice, film time, the weight room, wherever it may be, where they can practice and acquire these skills. And lastly, right, the package of relaxation and imagery. I like this, especially in high school. I find that many of our athletes, especially with many of the external pressures, they're not relaxed and they're over aroused before an event. And relaxation can kind of bring them back down. Or, hey, we've done this, right? We've practiced, all week. Now let's just go out there and perform and put what we need to put onto the field. In conclusion, like I said, PST, okay, that's the overall umbrella. The psychological interventions, which I went over, and future use. This has been informing for me as well. Just, sometimes I think we get so caught up in the X's and O's, we forget about the Jimmys and Joes. And to be able to assist that athlete and do this together, it's almost a combined intervention, not only for the athlete, but for the coach as well. And I think it will help me understand my athletes much better. Lastly, here are my references, and I want to thank you for your time and have a nice day.